The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum. Did I like this book? Yes and no. If you take the book on its own merits, I loved it. It's a real page turner. However, in today's day and age, you can't just take the book on its own merits because I'm a movie buff and I came to the book because of my love of the movies, the Matt Damon, the original Matt Damon Jason Bourne trilogy. And that's how I arrived at the book. So I can't just take the book on its own merits. I'm always constantly comparing it to the films, the Matt Damon films. And in that sense, the Bourne Identity film starring Matt Damon in 2002 is a superior work to this book, in my opinion. And I can see why they made those changes, because the film version is very different to this book version. Clearly, there is an issue of era and time, because the book was published in 1980 and the Matt Damon film came out in 2002. So there's a difference in technology, there's a difference in era, there's a difference in time. When this book was written, the Cold War was still very much going on. People were scared of the Soviet Union. And in 2002, the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. And so you have different circumstances, you have different eras. And what I also need to bear in mind is that I have been reading a lot of spy novels recently. I'm reading books in the spy genre and in the kind of espionage, crime thriller genre. And I'm also comparing this book to books that I've read recently. So you can never take any work of art or any work of literature or any film just on its own merits. The human brain doesn't work that way. We're constantly comparing things, aren't we? It's the same with football players, soccer players. You can't just say, I love this particular soccer player, because you're always comparing them to a soccer player that you loved from the past, for example. So what's great about this book? It's very well written and it keeps you wanting to turn the page. You want to know what's going to happen to Jason Bourne next. It has that same opening with him having the amnesia, losing his memory, turning up in Marseille, in Porte Noire, not knowing where he is, trying to piece together his memory and trying to piece together who he is. And then as the story goes on, he finds out people are trying to kill him. Why are they trying to kill him? He doesn't know. He has to figure that stuff out as he goes along. And he also finds out that he has these skills. How does he have these skills? He doesn't know. He can speak all these different languages and he has incredible skills with weapons and with hand-to-hand combat and with wearing disguises. And he doesn't know how he acquired those skills. And as the book goes on, he's trying to discover how he acquired those skills. Why are there people trying to kill him? And what's his identity? You know, that's the whole thing, the Bourne identity. So those elements are all the same. And they're very exciting. And you do get involved with the character. Where this book falls down, in my opinion, is towards the sort of middle section. First of all, the book is very long. It's 566 pages, this version that I've got. And that is very long. Although I got through it quite quickly, because it is a page turner, I've found that I was kind of reading more out of loyalty to the film franchise rather than to the book itself, if you know what I mean. And where this book, in my opinion, has a kind of false step is in the middle section, the love story between Jason Bourne and Marie St. Jack. And part of you just doesn't quite buy it because, spoiler alert, by the way, spoiler alert. What happens is that Jason Bourne has to take her as a hostage in order to escape a particular situation in a hotel in Switzerland. And after taking her as a hostage, later on, she falls in love with him. and they fall in love with each other, and it's kind of, let's say, convenient, or what they would say nowadays, Deus ex machina. It's kind of too convenient for the plot and not really that convincing. But apart from that, it's a brilliant read. And here, the main villain is an assassin called Carlos. And the storyline is that what the American Secret Services did to Jason Bourne is that they convinced him that he was an assassin called Kane. And they created an assassin called Kane in order to flush out this world internationally known other assassin called Carlos. And the American authorities want to catch Carlos. And in order to catch Carlos, they force Jason Bourne to become somebody called Kane. And that's the bit that Jason Bourne can't remember. He's got amnesia and can't remember that at all. And so the bad guy in this is clearly Carlos. Whereas if you've seen the movies, there's no mention of a guy called Carlos. The bad guys are just simply his previous employers who are trying to chase him and take him out so that he won't give away any national secrets, that kind of thing. There's a small element of that in this, but it's a very small element. The main element is the bad guy called Carlos. And in the end, obviously because there are sequels written to this book, spoiler alert, Carlos gets away and Jason Bourne doesn't get Carlos in the end, neither do the American authorities. And so Carlos escapes. And so I'm guessing that if you read the second book in the series, that kind of chasing Carlos versus Jason Bourne, that kind of thing continues. So it's an interesting book whenever it's about Jason Bourne, and whenever it's about him, it's, there's lots of action scenes in the book, passages where Jason Bourne is using his skills to escape certain death and to escape being chased. Those bits are all very exciting. And the bits where Jason Bourne is speaking different languages and figuring out puzzles, those bits are all very exciting. And the parts where it's more to do with the love story with him and Marie, that's where the book starts to slow down and you can feel the book dragging. And you're kind of thinking, these bits really could have been cut out. And there's no need for the book to be that long. And those are the parts of the book that drag it, is the love story between Jason Bourne and Marie. Just because of how it started, you kind of just don't buy it enough. And I think that's where it falls down slightly. What I love about Robert Ludlum, you can tell that he's clearly read, because this book was published in 1980. If you look at a book like The Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth, that was published in 1971, before this, I would guess, I'm almost certain that Robert Ludlum read that book. I'm almost certain that Robert Ludlum read the Ian Fleming James Bond novels. In fact, I'm certain he did, because in this book, he refers to Ian Fleming by name in one of the passages. He talks about a character that's reading a newspaper article, and in the newspaper article, it mentions Ian Fleming books. So Ludlum has definitely read Ian Fleming. In my opinion, he must have read Frederick Forsyth. Why do I say that? Because of his writing style. His writing style reminds me of Frederick Forsyth and Ian Fleming, and I guess it's a similar genre, so that makes sense. And he has the same kind of attention to detail. So I remember one of the things I love about reading the Ian Fleming James Bond books, and I loved about reading Frederick Forsyth's The Day of the Jackal, is the attention to detail, especially in Europe. They know all these European street names and the names of small towns in France and Switzerland and Germany. And Robert Ludlum's book is the same. Here, he's telling you about small towns in Switzerland with their names, Stepfanstrasse and so on and so forth. And all these different Strasses and Autobahns and all these connecting roads and motorways, and how they lead from one village to another village and one street to another street. And he knows that for Paris, for different parts of France, different parts of Switzerland. So clearly, Robert Ludlum has traveled to those places and visited those places and traveled around Europe. And that attention to detail, that always gets me. I always love that about these types of, on this genre of book, is that attention to detail. Because it as a reader, I become transported. I can imagine myself, I can imagine myself in that part of Switzerland or that part of France and Paris. And you get these romantic ideals and romantic fantasies in your mind, which is what any good book should do. So those are always my favorite parts of the book, is when Jason Bourne is displaying his skills, displaying his knowledge of geography, displaying his knowledge of language. Those are always my favorite parts. So I would recommend reading this book, especially if you're a fan of the movies. But if you really love the films, I think you'll love the films in the end more than the book. But the book is still worth a read. The book is still worth a read. I don't think I'm going to read the subsequent ones. I want to go on now to read other spy genre authors like John le Carre. I haven't read a John le Carre book yet. That's definitely on my list. I need to do that. And I want to read the rest of the Ian Fleming Bond novels in order. So this book hasn't made me fall in love with it enough that I want to read the rest of the series. And I definitely prefer the Jason Bourne movies to this book. But it's still a good book. And I still recommend you read at least this first book in the series, just to say that you've read it and just to sort of see where the film series came from. Oh, by the way, side note, there was actually in 1988. So this book was published in 1980. The Matt Damon Bourne film came out in 2002. Somewhere in between, in 1988, there was a TV movie version of this made. Very low budget, and you can tell it's low budget when you watch it, starring Richard Chamberlain, the late great Richard Chamberlain, as Jason Bourne, and starring Jacqueline Smith, the beautiful, if you're a fan of Charlie's Angels, as people of a certain age or a certain vintage would remember the original Charlie's Angels TV series. And we all fancied Jacqueline Smith in that, and Cheryl Ladd and Farrah Fawcett and Tanya Roberts. But the beautiful Jacqueline Smith, she plays Marie St. Jack alongside Richard Chamberlain in that TV movie version. And that TV movie version is very close to the book. It follows the plot of the book much more closely than the Matt Damon movies. But it's low budget, and because it follows the plot of the book, it's not as good. Because, as I've said, the Matt Damon films are much better, in my opinion. But yeah, go and check the book out. Check the movies out if you haven't. See you on the next one, guys.